Come, spellweavers, reavers, rogues, and men-at-arms, and answer the call of adventure. Pick up your sword, your axe, your spellbook, your bow, your rulebook, and your dice, and join the forces of good in their eternal fight against vile monsters, conspiring min-maxers, horny bards, and blood-soaked murder hobos. Discover the treasure trove of role-playing games here on Rollin Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide.
Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome back to Rollin Bones with Ryan
Weavers,
Howard.
Reavers,
Oh my goodness,
rogues,
my
and
music is playing
men-at-arms,
again.
and answer the call of adventure.
Not do that. All right. No offense to John Page, that is a fantastic intro, but we do not need to play it a second time. Anyway, welcome back to Rollin Bones, where we are making old school young again. I am your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard. I am the RNOSR, allegedly, and this is Rollin Bones. I don't want to waste too much time on my stuff tonight, so I'm just going to speed through all of my shilling here. Just, remember at Howard_Ryan Gregg on Instagram and Twitter. YouTube, I am at Rollin Bones, and twitch.tv/Rollin Bones Ryan if you prefer to watch this live on Twitch. I am also building things up on Rumble. I will have new videos up there soon. I'm recording this weekend and hoping to release more short form videos. Probably about 2 a month is where I'm going to have to cut things off. Remember to like, share, and subscribe if you want your friends to find this, if you want to kind of boost us in the algorithm. That is a great way to help. And of course, I want to mention that we have the Teepublic store, so I will go ahead and show you that. Once again, we've got 3 designs for you to choose from as far as Rollin Bones t-shirts. I think all of them are cool, but hey, that's just my opinion. I hope you guys who want them will pick them up, though, because they're a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun designing them, and we will be launching new designs as soon as I think of them. All right, well, that is my speed round as far as kind of getting all my stuff out there. So let's bring on the main event. This is one of the most interesting voices out there as far as RPG content on YouTube is concerned. He is the dean of students, the chairman, and the president of Dungeon University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to Rollin Bones, Professor Dungeon Master.
Hello, Ryan.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. It's always great to talk with you on the show.
It's great to be here. Great to be anywhere.
Awesome. All right, well, let's not beat around the bush here because there's kind of one big thing that I've seen over the past month or so where it seemed like a portion of your audience got really mad at something you said, which, gotta be honest, I have not seen a lot of with your audience, being a part of the Facebook group at least. And that was your reaction to the D&D movie. So real quick, for anyone who doesn't know already, what were your thoughts on that movie?
I didn't really like it. I didn't really like it. A lot of people did. If you enjoyed it, I'm glad you did. I really wasn't a fan, which we can get into why, but it's not my kind of movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it got good reviews. So lots of people liked it. But, it's just one of those things. I'm not, it has nothing to do with the game or its depiction. I just didn't really like it as a film.
Yeah, fair enough. And just to put my cards on the table, I have not seen it. I'm actually, I refuse to see it because one of a lot of the things that you said about it, it kind of confirmed a lot of my suspicions about the movie. And that's that it was just kind of a goofy Marvel-like action comedy. And we have no shortage of those kinds of movies. So I was just like, I don't really see the need to get to the theaters for this one.
I think that's pretty much what a lot of people were thinking. especially normies that are outside the Dungeons and Dragons sphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of gamers were surprised at that reaction from audiences. I've been saying for a while that this is how people are going to react to it. Because if you look at the way they marketed the movie, the trailers were very joke heavy. They used a kind of a remix of a classic rock song. Everything said essentially, "This is Guardians of the Galaxy with bows and swords and lutes." And I think a lot of people saw that and were just like, "No, we're good. We have that already."
I agree. I think that's exactly what it is. I think that what was the song in the trailer? Was it "Immigrant Song" by Led Zeppelin?
I think it was "Ramble On."
Oh, okay, all right, it's one of them. But I just think people had thought they saw it before without seeing it. That's my perception.
Yeah. Now, something that I found kind of odd and interesting about the reaction from gamers to this movie was there was a lot of talk about this reminded me a lot of what happens at my table, which kind of got me thinking, why are so many people running such goofy tables? And it got me thinking a lot about people that have clapped back at me on Twitter saying, I like that my game is stupid, kind of reveling in how silly their D&D games are. And so it got me thinking about uh fantasy RPGs and how we perceive them. And I have to go ahead and ask this question. Should fantasy RPGs be taken seriously? Meaning, should players and GMs treat the game as if the events that are happening in them are important?
I think they should treat their individual games the way they want to treat them. There's so many different tones with Dungeons and Dragons, and that's one of the things that makes making a movie difficult, because my tone of Dungeons and Dragons might be different than someone else's. Someone else's game might be super lighthearted and the characters never die. And other people, it's like super grimdark and the characters frequently die. And so it's tough to capture that and put that on the screen. And so to me, the film, I have no idea how other people are playing the game. And certainly my games can be funny. And I think they're role-playing games that lend themselves to humor, like Paranoia. I ran a session of Paranoia recently. It's hilarious. So there's just so many different styles of Dungeons and Dragons. I don't claim that mine is like the best or anything. But I think that certain things about the film, this goofy hodgepodge of characters and their plans and stuff like that. I think it struck a nerve with a lot of people that, okay, that's like what my group is like. But I can't argue with it if you think your group is like that.
Yeah. Now, I know, like in your video talking about the movie, you kind of gave these predictions, but again, just to refresh people, what do you see kind of like the future of this movie being, or the legacy, the ultimate fate of Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves, before we dig into the kind of deeper topic around all this?
Well, predicting is always dangerous. I think that in a year from now, people will be like, yeah, that movie was good, but maybe it wasn't as good as I thought it was. Because the thing is, even the critics that liked it's sort of like a passable 3-star review. Yeah, this is good. A lot of good movies come out, and it's just going to be replaced with other ones. I think that it's not going to be the legacy of like the Jeremy Irons one, where everyone was like severely disappointed. It's going to be like, oh, that was a movie, that was a thing that happened, and I don't think there's going to be a sequel. It made $82 million so far. I was just checking Box Office Mojo. This is a film that cost $150 million to make, and a film has to do double its budget worldwide just to break even. And right now it's at about $150 million. So it's fallen it's not a complete bomb, but it's fallen far short of expectations. So you're not going to get a sequel to this film.
Hmm. Yeah, and something else that's worth mentioning, just kind of a factoid that I heard not too long ago. Apparently, movie studios are no longer listing reshoots as part of the budget that like their movies costed
Mhm.
total. So if this movie went through any amount of reshoots, those numbers are not going to be listed publicly, and that will also add uh, pretty substantially to the overall cost of the movie.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird accounting with films, but I don't think that there's going to be any reshoots with this film. I think they made the film that they wanted to make. They had a vision. They
Mhm.
set out. I think that the filmmakers gave the studio what it wanted, and there were a couple of things that botched up the reception to it. But it's definitely a cohesive movie. It follows through with what it, it it doesn't seem confusing. Like a lot of times when we get films with tons of reshoots and they change the ending, and I don't think that's the case with this one.
Mhm. Yep, fair enough. Now, kind of moving beyond talk about the movie itself, and we'll circle back to that probably at the end of this conversation and talk a little bit about where this means the hobby is going now. Um, but back on this topic of taking games seriously, when it comes to actually running games at your table and the way that your table functions, how would you define taking a game seriously? Does that concept or idea even mean anything significant to you?
Yeah, for me, taking the game seriously is the players get here on time. Like they
Yeah.
arrive on time and they're prepared and they're ready to play. No one has to leave early. No one comes especially late, and they're all in the zone. They're not on their cell phone, but whether it's a humorous game or whether it's a serious game, a lot of that's out of even my control because I set up the encounters and then the players run with them. So I don't know. I imagine how it's going to go, and then they take it in a whole different a direction. It's not like all my games are like grimdark all the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
There's we have a lot of laughs at these tables. So that's yeah, I played with DM Scotty last week, live and in person, and it was like a super light and kind of funny game. It was a funny survival horror game, and but we were all there on time, and we're all like 100% focused in living in the moment, living our characters and making these decisions, even though like I deliberately made some dumb decisions and killed the whole party. But
I think Rex Teal makes a good point here in chat. There's an expectation of a more serious tone that a lot of groups try to achieve, but then something unexpected happens that throws it off. I do think that's a pretty common experience for a lot of gamers.
yeah, I mean, you could have somebody in the group that's not on the same page,
Mhm.
that doesn't believe, and tonally. Like I had a game master that wanted to run a champions game that was like kind of like the X-Men. It was like a lot of gravitas. And I played a guy, a superhero character called Special Delivery. And Special Delivery's thing was he could teleport, and he
Mhm.
was really goofy, over the top, like square jawed guy. And every time he would punch a villain, he would go Special Delivery,
Yep.
and it was like my game master hated this guy. He hated my character. And like I wasn't on the same page as him tonally,
Mhm.
so that can happen.
Now, was this as disastrous as the John Lovitz attempt?
So, all right, that's a deep cut. I'm glad you watched my video. So, what Ryan's talking about is I played this character who was a thief, and I decided him to base him on John Lovitz's pathological liar character from Saturday Night Live. Nobody in your audience who's under 30 is even going to know who he was or But he was like, yeah, that's the ticket. He would lie about like this, the slightest thing. So my game master pulled me aside and he said, dude, it was after the game. It was privately. He says, dude, I hate this character. I hate that voice. And I'm going to kill your character. You got to change it. You got to change it. Get a different voice. And I got a different voice. I took the notes like an actor. And a lot of people, it's funny. A lot of people in the comments and stuff, they got really mad. That game master is a jerk. But it's his game too. And if I was annoying, if he didn't, I appreciated the feedback, and I changed the character, and then I played the character for years. It's a great character. So it all worked out in the end.
Well, the thing you don't understand about my audience here, Dan, is I'm younger than all of them, so they all understand that.
They do?
Yeah.
You remember that character?
I don't remember that. I'm 27, so I don't remember that character. But I think a lot of people that watch Rollin Bones actually do remember that character. So, but kind of moving on past that, and getting into one of the things that I ran into a lot in discussing kind of serious games or wanting to take games seriously. Have you ever experienced people just outright reveling in how silly they make their games, or how I guess unengaged or unserious they are about role-playing games?
I don't know. I only play in my games. Like I've seen kids playing, and I've watched them. Like a group of kids playing, and I'll be like, okay, there's one kid spinning in a chair, one kid's on a phone, and two kids have Nerf guns. I don't know what they're doing. It doesn't seem like Dungeons and Dragons to me, but whatever, man. If that makes you happy, the only time I would get upset is if, like, once in a while I do want to have some sort of like serious emotional scene.
Yeah.
That I'm leading to. And that's the only time where if a player cracks a joke or something like that and just totally tries to take the attention out, then I'll be like, and that's kind of annoying. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I've seen a lot of people, and I do want to say that this is probably a vocal minority, but there are certain people out there who, even when you say stuff like, don't be on your phone, pay attention to what other players are doing, don't be just kind of flipping through the book willy-nilly, be ready to, do what you want to do on your turn. There are people who will say things like, why are you so uptight about this? It's just a game.
Yeah, I've never encountered that, because if I did, I wouldn't play with them anymore.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to go about it.
Right? I mean, that's just like rude.
Yeah.
That's rude. These games are about playing in the, being in the moment. Let's just have the moment. Let's be 4 or 5 people, living in the moment, sharing the imagination. 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't know. I probably wouldn't play that type of game. I probably wouldn't play a role-playing game with them.
Yeah, I agree here. Kamakid, I don't know how you say that name. It's just a game is a red flag. And I think you get into a lot of people who say stuff like that, who for them D&D is just another social experience. It's not any different from bowling night for them. They don't see it any differently. And so telling them to like pay attention, it's like, I don't know, telling a frog not to drag his butt on the ground or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I had more experience that when I was younger. Like when I was in my 20s, I had different groups of people that play Dungeons and Dragons. And, some were just like my closest friends. And there were a couple of people there that were there because everybody else was there. That's what we were doing. And, as time moves on, I've learned that, okay, I could play this game. Maybe I could play Wingspan with that person, right? Or I could play, I don't know, some other cool board game with that person, like Dead of Winter or something, but it's a role-playing game is an art thing. And so now I select people based on how well, like from my home game, I mean, I'll run for anybody, and I run tons of open games, but like for my own game, I only invite very close friends that I know will, contribute to the story.
Yeah. Now you brought up where there's a lot of laughs at your table, which I think that's true for just about everyone. But you also like to have moments that are serious and moments where there's some kind of real emotional impact. And so this gets into a concept that I've heard comic book writer Chuck Dixon talk about, where there's a difference between humor and comedy, where humor is present in a lot of stories that aren't necessarily funny. It's present in dramas, and it's usually a means to relieve tension in situations where that becomes necessary. Whereas comedy is like anti-tension. Comedy is paying off a buildup of tension with a joke rather than with kind of an explosion. Do you feel like there's a meaningful distinction between these two things? Would you agree with what Chuck Dixon said there? What are your thoughts on kind of that, splitting of concepts there?
Chuck Dixon is absolutely right. He's absolutely right. And there's a needle, there's a comedy needle, right?
Mhm.
So like the Dungeons and Dragons movie, it's not The Princess Bride. Like that's a pure comedy, and it's brilliant. It was written by a brilliant guy, William Goldman. And there are funny moments like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, like the first film with like the basket scene. It is funny. That's hilarious. Like when Indiana Jones takes out the gun and shoots the swordsman. I mean, it brings down the house. If you ever seen that in a movie theater with live people. And if you listen to John Williams' score, it is funny, but it's not comedy, and when you think Marion's blown up, then the next scene, Indy's drinking. And I saw that in a movie theater. And I thought, we all thought she was dead. So you could switch back and forth. And the humor is in that situation, that particular situation, as opposed to everything is played for laughs and nothing is serious.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with Mr. Dixon.
Yeah, and I mean to bring up a movie that I think we're both big fans of, Scorsese's Goodfellas. There are lots of moments in that movie that are funny or humorous. Funny How, that's a hilarious scene. Even the buildup of the Billy Bats scene is humorous up until it isn't. So I feel like even in really serious, really intense dramas, there are moments of humor, but the humor doesn't undercut the seriousness of what's going on overall or even in specific scenes.
I agree. And that's a good example. It's a drama that has legitimately funny, laugh out loud moments. And I think that, going back to the Dungeons and Dragons film, the new one, it's like, it's not comedy like I'm trying to figure out where my hand is. It's not like a comedy like Princess Bride. It's not funny on that level. And it's not serious enough to be an adventure film like Raiders. It's sort of like in the middle. I just think that's a tough hat trick to pull off. And maybe they pulled it off because people liked it. But, the box office, I don't know if people are into it.
Now, to kind of throw a wrench into things here, do you think the D&D movie would be a little bit more successful or resonate a little bit more with kind of non-gamer audiences if they had turned that comedy dial more towards the Raiders side of things and made kind of the type of classic adventure movie we don't really see anymore? Do you think that would have at least been kind of a disruptor for a lot of the general audiences, the kinds of movies that they're seeing?
Could have been. It could have been. But, with that movie, you have Steven Spielberg there. You have George Lucas there. You have John Williams with his amazing score. You have Lawrence Kasdan doing writing. I mean, like, you have a bunch of people that are just like at top level. top level talent, like the best people ever in movies ever, all working on the same group project. I think that with the Dungeons and Dragons movie, I think it's more of a failure of marketing. It doesn't seem like the fans were disappointed. When I do my analysis, I can separate like what I like. I realize that 90% of the people that saw that movie seem to like it. So maybe it's not the problem, and the critics seem to like it. They did give it 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's probably in the marketing of the film that disconnect happened. And I think there are a number of things they did wrong with the marketing, which I don't think could be argued.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if the audiences don't show up, there is a problem with the marketing. So I think you're 100% spot on there. Now, earlier you mentioned that not all of your games end up going kind of in a grimdark direction. I know just based on the videos that you've made and some of the things that we've talked about in the past, you do tend to like things a little bit more on the gritty side, a little bit more on the grim side. But do you think there is kind of room within the concept of serious games for people to take games seriously, treat the events happening in the game like they're serious, like they matter, without venturing necessarily into that kind of grim, dark territory?
Sure. And you can cross over and have in jokes like the old Warhammer modules, like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or some of the early writers like Kim Newman writing his Jack Yeovil, like with Drachenfels. I mean, there's a lot of humor in those books, but they're also very grimdark. And it's it's all about the thing, the verisimilitude of making the thing seem real. And those jokes are funny. The situations are funny because they seem plausible, but it's a tough humor to do.
Gotcha. I do think that's a big, you used a word that a lot of people throw around these days, but verisimilitude is kind of a big part, at least in my definition of taking things seriously. The gaming world that you're in has to feel real to people. They have to be able to latch on to and resonate with what you're presenting to them. They have to recognize elements of it and essentially be able to mentally interface with the world that you presented. So I think having a world with verisimilitude is really a lot of the heavy lifting of getting players to engage with your game in a more serious manner.
Yeah, that's what I think. And so just to put a definition the way I see it, it's the appearance that this world is actually plausible. Mm-hmm. And there are degrees of verisimilitude. So when I see Star Wars, I'll buy spaceships fly like jet planes and they blow up in space, even though there's no oxygen.
Yeah.
And I believe, and I'll buy that they have sound effects in space. I can buy that. And I can buy the Force exists. I can't buy Princess Leia all of a sudden flying through this space like Mary Poppins.
Right.
I can't, like it takes me out of it. Like that's one step too far. And I think that like for verisimilitude, for a role-playing game, it's at a different spot for everybody. And it's even in Dungeons & Dragons because like I don't buy that every single thing can see in the dark. Like in Dungeons & Dragons in 5e, the way it's written, it's sort of like a standard feature you can see in the dark. It's like a standard feature on every Honda has a backup camera. You've got infravision. And it's just standard feature. It doesn't seem amazing. It's a way to bypass, in one of my opinions, something that creates tension, which is resource management, which can also be boring if it's not done right. But it's verisimilitude. I just don't buy that. Here's another verisimilitude thing I don't buy. I'm wondering in the Dungeons & Dragons film, like, okay, why are they in a prison and they have to go to a parole hearing? Medieval prisons weren't like that. They whipped you, they tortured you for a confession or something, and then they chopped your head off.
Mhm.
Let you go. They don't have a supermax prison because they didn't have the concept of rehabilitation. Now, when I said that to people, they say, well, it's not the Middle Ages. Okay, why does everybody wear armor then? Why are they wearing swords then?
Right.
Why don't they have jet planes? Of course, it's the Middle Ages. It's some other world equivalent of the Middle Ages. So I can buy the Underdark exists, and I can buy that. I can buy, but like that prison, I was like, why would they keep dangerous prisoners around for grand theft when in the real Middle Ages, that sort of theft, you would definitely get your head chopped off or hung.
Mhm. Yeah, and the only other time they would hold you is if essentially you were not dangerous enough to execute, and that would be until like you were able to pay off your debt. So
Right.
those are really the only two. It's a holding space until they're able to execute you, or until you're able to work off your debt doing whatever it is, uh, that they had prisoners do.
Hmm. And I can buy, all right, all these monsters speak English. I can buy that. And then just like the prison was, I don't know, it was one step too far from it. For other people, they have no problem with it. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, off on kind of a different topic. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but my friend Crafty Matt has a question here. Um, One of our good friends on Rollin Bones here, Alex McCrease, recently made a video about how it's not the job of the GM to make sure that players have fun. What are your thoughts on that statement? Where would you fall on that particular uh, idea that it's not the game master's job to make sure that everyone at the table is having fun?
Well, thanks for the question, Crafty Matt. I've seen Crafty Matt on Twitter, I think. So
Yep.
the that's a great quick clickbait title for a video.
Yeah.
That's the sort of controversial thing I would put in there. I'm of two minds. On one hand, it's not to make sure the game master's not job is to not make sure everyone is entertained every second. The players have to do some work and entertain themselves. However, me personally, I wouldn't invite the players if I didn't think I could, you know, my game would be fun.
Right.
So I'm of two minds.
And to speak a little bit more to the broader point that Alex was making in his video, um, what he was saying is that it's the GM's job to be the referee, essentially. Like you are the arbiter of the rules and the arbiter of the world, since arbiter of worlds is his thing. You're not, the activities director on a cruise ship. You're there to mediate when the players need mediation in what they're doing. You're there to answer rules questions, and you're there to be the antagonists when your players run up against antagonists.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with it. I agree with that statement in that the way you described it. At the same time, when I'm looking and creating situations for things, I definitely think, okay, well, what would be fun
Hmm.
with those things? What would make this fight more fun? Is it on a cliff like the one behind me?
Yeah.
I mean, I like to create problems for players that are potentially different than they would have expected and throws a wrench into whatever it is they're doing.
Hmm. And likely Arrow, to answer your question here, why can't I accept riding into battle in a Ford Fiesta? Because the Fiesta will not make it to the battlefield; it'll break down before you get there.
Yeah. Well, here's a verisimilitude. So I'm working on a video now, and it's a topic I've done before. People, the idea that well, in session 0, we decided that we don't want to have death in this game, and okay, if I was playing in that game, why would I wear armor?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because if that's it, well, then you don't have to wear armor because you can't die.
Hmm. Exactly. Connor McLeod doesn't wear armor because he knows he can't die. So, Why should I be any different?
Yeah. That's another classic film, by the way, I don't really like.
You're not a Highlander guy?
Yeah, like I saw it. I like, the Queen song and and stuff, but are my friends, man, they love that movie. And I was just like, this isn't that great.
I
But
don't buy Sean Connery as a Spaniard.
yeah, it's just weird. A Frenchman is the Scotsman and the Scotsman is a Spaniard. It's just so weird. It's a very strange movie.
It is.
And
It really,
and the great prize, you get to die. That's terrific.
I will say, as a Highlander fan, and I've heard this is not my original idea, but being a Highlander fan is very much, uh, jokingly, I will say, like what I imagine being in an emotionally abusive relationship is like.
I'm glad you enjoy it, though. A lot of people enjoy Highlander, and I think that's great. I love the
Yeah.
Queen song.
Oh
It was
yeah,
like, "We are the princes of the universe." Yeah, that was a good song.
fantastic song.
Yeah.
Now, one question that I have when it comes to, and you see this, I feel like I see this a lot, specifically in movies that are made by and made in the style of like Taika Waititi. There's a lot of humor in place of what should be character development or dramatic moments. And it almost feels like it's used to cover up a lack of effort. Have you ever seen excessive humor kind of used in that way to cover up essentially places where a storyteller or even a game master has decided just not even to bother trying?
No, I can't say that I have. He's one of the Marvel guys, like, right? He's
Yeah.
made, he made the Thor movie,
Mhm.
which I didn't see the last one. Did he make the one before that?
Yeah. Yeah. He made Ragnarok as well.
Yeah, Ragnarok. Like, I saw that. It's like, it's all right. It's like, is it anybody's favorite movie?
Probably not.
Yeah, not really. I had a good time. I don't know if I'd see it again.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's kind of, but I mean, it's hard work to make a movie. I mean, those people work hard, even
Yeah.
if the movie turns out terrible. So I don't know.
Mhm.
It's not something I've seen. Yeah, is that something you think you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I've definitely seen it at tabletops, not a lot, but I've seen people kind of just throw up their hands instead of trying to figure out, okay, I've gotten myself into this mess as a game master. How do I get myself out of it? I've seen people just kind of throw up their hands and go, all right, let's play yakety sax. This is essentially a Benny Hill episode now. Um, and I feel like that's where a lot of Taika Waititi's movies end up going too. But there just seems to be this notion that it's hard to tell compelling dramatic stories or to have compelling dramatic moments. So why even bother? We all know that this is, a silly game or, a silly movie genre in Taika's case. Let's just kind of lean into the silliness and not even bother trying to make this believable or have these moments have any kind of real emotional impact.
So something like that for me would be like Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
All right, but again, tons of people went, made that movie and made it happen, and they put 100% in. They put in 100. Like that's what they wanted. That's
Yeah.
what Joel Schumacher wanted. He got the film he wanted, and it's just not my jam.
Mhm.
It is not my thing.
Iron Man, is that how Game of Thrones ended? Yes, I would say so. Now, I guess along the same lines, because we do see that this style has become essentially the mainstream popcorn action movie style. This is how we make these kinds of movies now. Um, do you think it's become at all unfashionable to make any sort of content, be it a role-playing session or a movie or a book that handles things in kind of a mature manner, takes itself seriously, and is just very earnest with its presentation. Do you think that's become kind of passe for a lot of people?
I don't know. I see a lot of films that are serious too.
Mhm.
Like The Northman.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if anyone saw that but me. But yeah, that's pretty serious film. It's I just think that that's kind of what people are. Look, when something works in Hollywood, they do it again and again and again. But look, the Batman isn't that way.
No, not
You
at
know,
all.
so and by the way, that tone doesn't work with everything. That's their problem with Superman. They can't
Yeah.
figure out Superman because Superman's not Batman.
Mhm.
Like I know there's a whole bunch of people that want to see a Snyderverse, but his Superman film, Man of Steel, was a terrible. It's terrible. It's an
Mhm.
awful. It's an awful film. Richard Donner understood Superman.
He
Like
did.
Superman, the movie is that Superman. And they're going to get that wrong until they realize that that is Superman, and Batman and Superman could conceivably exist in the same world, but it's two totally different tones.
Mhm. Batman and Superman, you need to get someone in there who realizes that Batman is looking at humanity at its very worst. He has seen essentially the worst that humanity has to offer. That's his worldview. That's what he essentially expects when he interacts with people. Whereas Superman is an outsider to the human race, but has been raised by some of the most moral, upstanding people, uh, essentially walking the face of the earth in Ma and Pa Kent. And so he is looking for and seeing the best in humanity. And that's where these two intersect with each other. And that's what makes their byplay so interesting is Clark looks for the best, Batman is looking for the worst. And I said it that way because Superman sees himself as Clark, Batman sees himself as Batman.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And that's a I'll buy that.
Now, and also because you mentioned Zack Snyder, I wanted to throw this out here. I've tried to defend Zack Snyder movies, but I can't help feeling that he makes movies by kind of ripping up comic books and then coloring the pages black and then stapling them back together. And that's how he makes superhero movies. Is like, we'll take this from The Dark Knight Returns, we'll take this from The Death of Superman, we'll take this from Justice League. I'm just going to tape these together. I don't care if they don't fit together. And then this is my magnum opus.
Hmm. It's way too rushed.
Yeah.
The DC universe was way too rushed. And it's a shame because some of those movies, like the Wonder Woman movie, was good. Except, the first one, they got it, which is a lot like Superman. It was a lot like Donner's Superman. Even to that little homage with the robbery in the alley was an homage to Donner's Superman.
Mhm.
But yeah, Zack Snyder's films, like I know he's got his fans there. I like 300.
Oh yeah.
And Watchmen's not that bad. It's pretty
Mhm.
good. But it's just like, the Justice League is not Watchmen.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if we're off topic. I don't know.
Just a touch. Now, you mentioned the Northman, you mentioned the Batman. I'll throw the Dune movie in there because I feel like it did this as well. There have been movies recently, like you said, that take themselves seriously and seem to have a good amount of success. With the Batman probably being the most successful of the three that we just mentioned there. Do you think that there's a hunger, whether it's known or unknown within people, to see more movies that strive for this kind of, you know, tonal seriousness and earnestness? And do you think that has any kind of translation to the tabletop?
I think this is tonal things like this. It's Shakespeare. It goes back to Shakespeare. I mean, he wrote Titus Andronicus,
Hmm.
and he also wrote like Love's Labor is Lost
Yeah.
and The Merchant of Venice, which are considerably lighter in tone. And he switched off because he knew that that's what audiences want. They didn't want the same thing over and over again. Some D&D tables are super lighthearted and nobody takes it seriously. Some people, you know, some game masters, they want to be the Scorsese of tabletop, and they want it to, serious. And every table is different. And if everybody is happy at the table, then that's the game.
Hmm.
I think in terms of buying games, if you're looking at systems, right, you got a lot of games like Shadow of the Demon Lord. That's pretty dark. You got Mirikabori, which is pretty dark, although it's got a comedic kind of black humor to it.
Hmm.
And then you have lighter games like Dungeons and Dragons. I think there's a variety of tones, and people can switch off. And that's one of the things that's great about what's, in my opinion, going to be happening over the next few years. I think you're going to see I don't want to say splintering of the hobby. I think there's going to be more interest in other games other than Dungeons and Dragons so that people can experience those tones, is my thinking.
Hmm. Chance, you will be in 3 of my games at North Texas. I would not go so far as to describe my table as a Scorsese table, but I do like to describe my world of Nighthaven as Goodfellas meets Sin City meets Lankmar. So you might experience a little bit of that. I hope you do enjoy it, though.
Yeah, how you know what I got to mention too, Blade Runner. I mean, the Blade Runner role playing game. That is, it's super serious, and those movies are super serious. Now Blade Runner 2040, whatever, with Ryan Reynolds or whatever, that was not a successful film, commercially,
Right.
right? Like the previous Blade Runner, I think it's appreciated by film aficionados. But who did it? Free League,
Mhm.
they and Alien too. Like those games are, dark. So I think that when you go into an IP game like a Blade Runner or an Alien, your brain as a player is probably primed to think, "Ooh, I got to take this seriously,"
Yeah.
because it's a horror game. So there's something to be said about that, and I think that you get a wide variety of, and you can. I don't think they've reprinted Toon, but that's probably the most lighthearted role playing game that I've seen. The cartoon role playing game. It's a brilliant game. It really replicates cartoons.
I've heard good things about Toon. I would actually enjoy playing that at some point.
Yeah, it was a hilarious game.
I know there's also a Rocky and Bullwinkle role-playing game as well.
Cool.
Now, earlier when you were talking about the way that the D&D movie handles like prisons and kind of their take on medieval crime and punishment, do you think there's an inability or an unwillingness for writers, directors, game masters to really kind of put themselves in a different time or different place and really understand how this would be meaningfully different from the time that we're living in?
I think Dungeons and Dragons has always been this weird, iconoclastic sort of world where different, completely, it's a mashup of so many different things. So it's always been, I'm trying to find the words here. It's always kind of been a mashup of times and cultures that just like, you have crossbows and plate mail, and they're all existing at the same time. Like those are leather armor. Leather armor didn't exist.
Right.
Like, and it's become standard. It's like it was a thing, but it wasn't a thing.
Mhm.
And and it's just like, it's just sort of it's D&D. It's got a tone of its own, and it's always kind of been ambiguous. So I think I understand like why they're like, well, it's not Earth. It is. Most people they don't do a whole lot of research. They're just like, okay, there's a long sword and a short sword. Short swords are something that didn't exist. That's a even better example. That did not exist, like historically. There's no such thing as a short sword. There's no such thing as a long sword. It's a sword or a hand and a half sword. So all the different, it's just got its own physics, and I think people just take it on that. And when you say something like, well, they shouldn't be together or something. Short swords shouldn't exist. Like, they can't buy it or whatever. I don't know if that was a cogent answer, but they just don't think of it that way. And a lot of people play it that way. Like, this is a medieval world, but it's based on our modern world. Like here's a classic example. Let's go in our D&D game and talk to the king. And then when we get to the king, we're going to not do what he wants, and we're going to, or she wants, and we're going to threaten them. Okay. That would get your head chopped off.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even look at the king in the face. You would just do what you were told. I mean, so most people don't play it that way. They play it like, you could be a smarty pants to anyone. But that's just, the world we live in. Actually, it's not really the world that people actually live in. They don't do that to their boss. But I think there's this fantasy where they do. And that has crept in. I think that's crept into a lot of the writing that you see today. Like Star Trek. Like old Star Trek, you're talking 60s Star Trek, that was written, those episodes, it was written, showrunner, produced by a bunch of guys that were in World War II. And that was based on like the way the Enterprise ran was like a submarine.
Yep.
And if you watched it, it was like nobody talked back to Captain Kirk. And everyone's like an expert at what they did. And they talk like adults. Modern Star Trek, like Star Trek Discovery, they're mouthing off to the captain. They're using curse words. In the Star Trek movies with, Chris Pine, they're punching each other on the bridge. They're having arguments about personal relationships while they're in, a spaceship trying to dodge, things coming at them. That is very modern. That's what takes me out of things like Star Trek. I'm like, military people wouldn't talk like that. They don't talk like that. And then that's where I lose it. So for some people, that's the way they want to play their Dungeons and Dragons game. That's cool. My game's a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's even you can see this in Next Generation even. There's a great interaction, and I can't for the life of me remember which episode, but there's an interaction where Worf disobeys Data on the bridge while Data is essentially the acting captain, and Data pulls Worf into the ready room and says, I hope that we can continue being friends, but you are not going to talk to me that way. I'm your superior officer. And they agree the way adults would and the way that actual military officers would to disagree respectfully, but continue working with each other. So, the fact that that's been lost in Star Trek, I mean, that's just I could talk for an hour and a half about just that, but and then to address some of the stuff that we have in chat here, legacy game mastering. Yes, a gladius was a real historical weapon, but like Professor was saying here, the gladius existed in the Roman times. It would not exist contemporaneous with the the hand and a half bastard sword or full plate armor that you see medieval knights wear. And you can see all throughout history different short bladed swords. Wakizashi is another example that Legacy gives here. The gladius, even the arming sword in the medieval period was a shorter blade, but the concept of this is a short sword that I guess, is like paired with a long sword in medieval European combat, specifically between, let's say, 1200 and 1600. That's where there's not anything specifically called a short sword.
Right, exactly.
And so you have, again, that's an example. Porting a gladius over into a medieval setting is an example of an anachronism that some people accept, some people don't. I kind of lean more towards, if you're going to be using a short sword, it's called an arming sword. That's where I typically land on stuff like that. But I mean, there's splitting hairs, and then there's looking at a hair under a microscope and grabbing the finest possible razor blade you can and digging in there with it.
We have another question.
Let's see. Just looking at chat, because I think I kicked up a hornet's nest here talking about short swords.
Yeah, we're not saying they didn't exist. They just didn't exist like a gladius is, that's Roman Empire, not, medieval England, France, Germany, whatever Dungeons & Dragons supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Max, I get wanting to be historically accurate. Then I remember I'm playing a game that doesn't take place on Earth and has elves. Max, we'll be playing historically accurate, so you will remove your glasses and you will play that way, and you will like it. Verisimilitude, Max.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, okay, it's not Earth, but it's an Earth that has developed along the same technological lines.
Right.
So we would assume, and in most games, there's kings and queens. It's not a democracy, because that wouldn't have been invented yet. So, so you have to follow through. I can buy that there are elves and they would exist like they do as a culture in Lord of the Rings, right? Where, so I buy that culture. And it is, Middle Earth is not our Earth, but it's super consistent in terms of the, the things. There are no airplanes in that world.
Right. Now, kind of moving back into the world of this, D&D movie and its ramifications. Considering the trajectory that we're on right now, what do you think this says about kind of the future of the hobby, especially when you consider the way that, I guess, the gamers as a whole have been reacting to a lot of decisions Wizards of the Coast has been making recently, whether it's the Creator Summit that happened, the fallout from their VTT announcements, or even, I mean, like just this week sending Pinkertons to a streamer's house. What do you think all of these things kind of indicate about the direction things are going in for WotC?
I think that company is in a little bit of trouble right now. I think Hasbro is in a little bit of trouble. Like short term, they're going to report quarterly earnings in 2 days. They're not going to have Christmas sales, because those are already lower than average, and it's done. That's done. That's not part of the quarter. They got people angry at them because of Magic. They lost $100 million on a movie. They're trying to sell a movie studio that no one wants to buy. They have angered their fan base on both Magic cards and Dungeons and Dragons. This, they're going to have to report that all those people canceled D&D Beyond. What do they have going for them? Is there a Transformers movie that I missed? So really short term, they're in a lot of trouble. And I think that it's only a matter of time before there's a change in management there and a change of direction. And then we'll see if they can right the ship. But they're doubling and tripling down on the VTT. And I'm not sure it's what people want. It might be. It might be a whole new genre of game, but I'm not sure what it's what people want. And I think that the good that's come out of the OGL and so on and so forth, it's made people look at other games. And there are so many great games that are not D&D. Even just variants, whether it's a variant or it's an original thing.
Mhm.
Now you have people looking at them, and I think that's a great thing. And I don't think D&D is going to be crushed and go away, but I really think that, 10 years from now, if we're looking at the peak of Dungeons & Dragons, it's peaked. 5e D&D was the peak, right? And you're about to see a fall off, and something else is going to happen. Hopefully it's exciting.
Mhm. Personally, I think the immediate future of role-playing games is going to be very, I think fragmented is probably the best way to put it. There's going to be people who go in all sorts of different directions. I imagine there will be at least an initial kind of crowd around whatever it is that uh, Matt Mercer is doing. I don't know why I
Dagger
just
art.
blanked on him.
Dagger
Uh,
art.
I think that game will have at least a big audience to start with. There's a lot of people who are moving to Castles and Crusades. There are people moving to retro clones and things like that. And then there are, the Pathfinder crowd is still the Pathfinder crowd. So I think the kind of immediate future is that D&D audience is going to go off into separate directions. And I think from there, it's just going to be a matter of where are the most consumers spending their money. And then when someone comes around with, hey, let's take this venerable brand, this Dungeons and Dragons brand that so many people recognize, and reinvent it, they're going to have to pick a direction to go into. And whatever kind of survives this splintering, whatever survives as the biggest, most popular version of role-playing games, that'll be the direction that D&D ends up going in, I'd say probably 10 years from now. And so it's just a matter of where are people going to go in the meantime.
My feeling is that 5e is the last version of D&D. That is the end. That they're going to only make superficial changes. That's why they announced that we're not calling it 1 D&D. We're not calling it 6e or 5.5. We're calling it 5e. And the reason is because it needs to be consistent so they can program it.
Yeah.
And they're moving on to, they believe the digital is the future. And even if it weren't the future, if you look at their other game, big game, Monopoly, it has superficial changes. They'll release a new version of Monopoly. You'll get different community chess cards, but it's the rules are the same. So the rules of Dungeons & Dragons, in my opinion, have ceased to evolve. Because if you're going to come out with a new edition, you have to have very creative people, super creative people. But if you're just going to keep it as is, you can replace every cog in the machinery without going back to zero. So I really believe, I accept them on face value that this is 5e and it will stay 5e. But the other way I look at games is it's like beer. Like when I was a kid, you had like Budweiser and like Michelob, and now you have a million different types of beer. It doesn't mean the beer audience is fragmented. It means they like different beer.
Mm-hmm.
People that, I remember distinctly, like in the late 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when Jim Cook did his Samuel Adams commercials, and he would like, I'm Jim Cook, I'm the brewer, it's my family recipe. And, we make less beer than Budweiser spills in a year, and it became, oh, I want to drink that beer. I want to see how a microbrew is different. And now you're going to enter the age of D&D microbrews, and there's room enough for everybody. It's just like you can drink Sam Adams now, but you could drink your local IPA at your local brewery. Everyone has one. Or you could drink Budweiser. It's up to you. Even Anheuser-Busch, it buys up tons of, other beer companies, like they own like Shock Top and whatnot, things that you don't even are aware of. And I just think that Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing games are moving in that same direction. And I think that's awesome because we live in a world with more beer, and we'll be able to live in a world with more games. And that's terrific. That's a terrific thing.
And honestly, like if that's the way it ends up going, I think that'll be for the best, because then most people will be able to find the games that they want. And as Lou says, Lou here, Dandelion Games is a small publisher, and that would be a good future for people like Lou and people like Levi Combs, other friends of mine who are small publishers. Um, this idea of niche gaming taking off, I think, is something that a lot of people would benefit from. So, I do hope that you're right in that regard, that it ends up being like the micro brew scene.
Yeah. Here's another analogy I'm going to give you. It's a lot like the board game scene.
Yeah.
I remember being at Gen Con in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was all Dungeons and Dragons. Magic didn't exist until it did. And then all of a sudden, it's still 2/3 Dungeons and Dragons, but now it's a third Magic. And then I remember at those conventions, nobody played board games. I mean, there were no board games. There were no fantasy board games at all. Games Workshop would do one, like it was Dragon Quest or Dragonfire or whatever the thing was, and like nobody would buy them. Now you go to Gen Con, it's 80% board games, right? And how many board game companies and what great games they're inventing. When you look at the stuff that Stronghold Games is producing, when you're looking at Terraforming Mars or a Wingspan, these are game companies that didn't exist like 15 years ago, and people weren't playing these games. The same thing could happen in role-playing games. And wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, as we're kind of, getting towards the end of our time here, I don't want to keep you on too terribly long. And I'm glad that he made a comment here, because Scott Orcus Dorcas in chat is going to be kind of the focus of this next topic. Scott recently brought on his son and one of his son's good friends on this show to talk about the way that teenagers in their D&D club at their high school are running and playing role-playing games. Not even just D&D, but they're actually running several different role-playing games. And one of the big pieces of feedback that they gave, and that really kind of stuck with me, was they don't like the video gamification of role-playing games. They've grown up with some of the best video games, the best looking, the best playing video games that you could imagine. And they don't want their tabletop games to be like that, because tabletop games should be different. They should be special, and they should be focused on imagination. You are also a father. You have kids that are right around the same age as Scott's kids, and you're also a teacher. In your experience with seeing young people game, have you noticed anything similar to that happening, where the Gen Z kids are saying, we don't necessarily want this to be like a video game, we want this to be different, we want this to be distinct?
Well, if it was a video game, they wouldn't show up. So I've got a Dungeons and Dragons club that's so popular at my school, I had to split it up into separate days, because the group is just too big. And so if they wanted to play video games, they could play them on their phone. But I say, no, we're going to put our phones away, and we play Theater of the Mind. So there's something about that experience that they may be looking for. It's counter programming. Like, everyone is moving digital. Let's maybe move to, something else. It's like, the tiny house movement. For decades, people bought McMansions. Now they're like, maybe maybe I want a tiny house, so I don't have to pay a mortgage, and maybe I don't have to, be a wage slave. And is that for everybody? That kind of tiny house kind of thing? No. And I think that maybe role-playing games is just not a market for everybody, but the people that really like it, they'll think it's, cool. And if they didn't think it was cool, they wouldn't be coming to the games. I also volunteer at a club, and it's just swelling. It's just swelling with kids. Like, we have to get more game masters because the groups are getting too big. So there might be something to that. And there was an article in Bloomberg today about how some analysts were expressing skepticism, that about the monetization, about the VTT, because maybe Dungeons and Dragons does something that you can't replicate with a VTT. So even Bloomberg caught on to it. Now, is that the way it's going to go? I don't know. But I think there could be. I can envision a world where you have a VTT, Dungeons and Dragons, and that might be Dungeons and Dragons for most people. When they think of it, they think of a VTT, but then there'll always be people playing Dungeons and Dragons around a table, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, honestly, I think the market for people who want to play D&D like it's a video game are people right around my age and maybe a little bit older than me. So people in their late 20s, early 30s, it seems to appeal to them. But because of how digital everything has become, I do think people that are just a little bit younger than me and kids that are in high school right now, everything is digital. Everything's on a screen. Everything is on computers and phones. And so if you offer them something different from that, if you offer them something where we're going to get together and play this game, but we're not going to use our phones, we're going to use our imaginations, it's not something they get to do on a regular basis. So it's interesting, it's exciting for them. And so I do think we're going to see a rise in that with kind of the younger players. Just this movement of let's get away from screens. Screens are our entire lives.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. That's the way I'd like to see it go. That's generally what happens. Every single generation, the younger generation is a reaction to the one before it. Mm-hmm. And whatever the previous generation, the next generation's like, that went a little too far. And they'll go back. Yeah. And it's kind of always ping-ponging.
Mm-hmm. And Crafty, I have had that happen to me as well. Those mandolin slicers are not fun. I am sorry if we caused you any pain. You can direct all potential inquiries or subpoenas to Biggest Geekus. They will be handling all of my legal fees and stuff like that. So, again, if you are looking for compensation in any way, you'll reach out to Biggest Geekus and they will take care of you.
I'm sorry, Matt.
Oh God, that's kind of a bummer note to end on. I'm sorry, Crafty. That actually is one of the worst things I've ever experienced in my life, is cutting my finger on a mandolin slicer.
Yeah, I think every crafter has cut some sort of fingertip off.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's lost a chunk.
Yep.
I certainly have, or burned your fingers.
Yeah. It'll make it harder for the cops to identify us if we commit crimes, I guess. Anyway, Professor, thank you again for coming on. This has been a great conversation as always. Before we go, though, anything you want to plug, anywhere you want to direct people, I will give you the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, well, of course, my own game, Deathbringer, is at Drive-Thru RPG. But I've just read just a ton of great role-playing games this week, including Black Sword Hack by Kobayashi. Mm-hmm. Knave 2 by Ben Milton is kickstarting. I just read it. It's fantastic. And, of course, Shadow Dark. And my buddy Scotty, Easy D6. These are great games that people should check out. Great independent games. And I'm thrilled. I can't believe so many great games are coming out at the same time. I love reading them.
Absolutely. Well, guys, that is going to be it for Rollin Bones this week. Next week, Servant of Shiloh returns for his second appearance here on Rollin Bones, and we're going to be talking all about superhero RPGs. So if you liked our little aside about Batman and Superman, you will love our discussion next week. Servant's always great to have on, but until then, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I will see you guys next time.